Zach, do you remember that movie? The one that clearly inspired Silent Hill Downpour? That's right. It's the 1993 film The Fugitive, directed by Andrew Davis. Based on the 1960s television show of the same name, The Fugitive is a sensational action thriller that was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. In addition to superlative casting decisions, the film was extensively shot in Chicago, giving the presentation a gritty, authentic feel when juxtaposed with the modern era of green-screened locations. The film begins in the dead of night in the city of Chicago. Aerial footage of the city is interspliced with slow-motion footage of a woman, played by Selah Ward, in her bedroom being murdered. Dr. Richard Kimball, played by peak 1990s-era Harrison Ford, is taken into custody in connection with the brutal killing. His home in the near North Side district of Chicago is a crime scene, surrounded by police and reporters, one of whom indicates the only details known to that point, that the victim, Helen Kimball, made a 911 call indicating that she was being attacked. The only other information known at the time was that the couple were attending a fundraiser earlier in the evening. Footage of previous events of the evening are mixed with scenes showing Richard Kimball being brought into interrogation at a Chicago Police Department precinct. The Kimballs had attended a charity event for the Children's Research Fund at the Four Seasons Hotel, also located in near Northside. Helen Kimball is shown speaking with several benefactors. Richard catches up with his friend Dr. Charles Nichols, played by Jerome Crabbe, who thanks Richard for letting him borrow his car. He also introduces him to a man he calls Alec, played by David Darlow. On their ride home, Richard receives a call on his car phone. Zach, do you remember car phones? Another doctor from Kimball's hospital is asking if he can assist with a patient who has gone into the OR. Richard agrees to come in. He drops his wife off at home, who says she'll wait up for him. Dr. Kimball, a vascular surgeon, does assist with the procedure in question. A 58-year-old's gallbladder needed to be removed. A Dr. Lentz was apparently who they would have paged before calling Dr. Kimball. Kimball is questioned by CPT detectives Kelly and Rossetti, played by Ron Dean and Joseph Casala. The doctor is claiming he had a fight with a one-armed man when he got home. The questioning starts out innocent enough. The murder weapon recovered from the scene is a revolver registered to Richard Kimball that is kept in Helen's bedside table. Once the conversation moves to Helen Kimball's sizable life insurance policy, for whom Richard is the sole beneficiary, it becomes abundantly clear Chicago PD thinks they have their killer. Richard Kimball recounts more details of his fight with a one-armed man, but with fingerprint and DNA evidence, he is charged with Helen Kimball's murder. Footage of Richard Kimball returning home during the murder is shown while the prosecution makes its case. The police detail robbery was ruled out as there was no evidence of forced entry or unexpected fingerprints. Atypical of a thriller, the film does show footage of another man fatally wounding Helen Kimball. The centerpiece of the prosecution's case is Helen Kimball's 911 call, which is damning to Richard's case, as the film provides additional context. Helen Kimball, on the verge of death, is confused and speaks Richard's name while ignoring the police dispatcher. Richard Kimball is convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. There will be additional discussion of this court case at the conclusion of this recap. Kimball, along with several other presumptive death row inmates shackled in leg irons, get on the bus. The prisoners are being transported to the Menard Correctional Center, the largest maximum security prison in Illinois. It becomes apparent quickly that the other 3 prisoners are up to something. One of the prisoners begins coughing and convulsing violently. One of the guards opens the secure door to check on the ill prisoner, and the source of the contagion is found: a plastic shiv, which the inmate then stabs the approaching guard with. All hell breaks loose. The head guard, played by Richard Reel, has already grabbed the shotgun and shoots the first prisoner, and in a struggle with the second, the bus driver is shot and killed. The guard knocks out the second prisoner, and it becomes apparent he isn't going to wait for Kimball and the third, a prisoner known as Copeland, played by Eddie Bo Smith, to approach, as he starts shooting at them. The bus, without a living driver, careens back and forth on the road, before lining up to a guardrail and topping over an embankment, rolling end over end several times before coming to a stop. The head guard, knowing Kimball is a doctor, demands he look at his injured associate. Kimball, remembering the guard tried to kill him not 30 seconds ago, requests to be unlocked so he can examine him, and the guard actually throws him the keys. Kimball drops them once his hands are free. When Kimball tries to render aid, a train horn is heard. The bus landed on train tracks. In the panic, the head guard and Copeland choose to flee. Kimball, still in leg irons, carries the injured guard to an open window and pushes him out, himself barely jumping from the bus less than a second prior to impact. The train derails, and with range of movement still compromised, Kimball outruns and jumps clear of a derailed train car that was heading directly for him in a sensational action set piece that would be unheard of in modern cinema. Kimball is assisted by Copeland, who pulls him from the wreckage and unshackles him, having taken the key after Kimball dropped it. Kimball discovers he has a puncture wound that will need attention. Both men agree to go their separate ways. The crash site is now an active crime scene overseen by the local sheriff and the Illinois State Police. A warrant squad from the United States Marshal Service arrives, led by Deputy Marshal Samuel Gerard, played by Tommy Lee Jones in an Academy Award-winning role. For the uninitiated, the Marshal Service is the law enforcement arm of the United States federal judiciary, and fugitive recovery is one of their missions. The agency is old enough to date back to the slave patrols of America's past. The head guard is being interviewed by local TV while County Sheriff Rollins, played by Nick Searcy, looks on. The head guard testifies that he pushed his injured partner out of the bus, while the sheriff glazes him for his alleged heroism. The guard also claims all 4 prisoners are dead. Sheriff Rollins is convinced Marshal Gerard's presence is unnecessary. Gerard wants checkpoints put up at a 15-mile radius, which the sheriff refuses to do. Annoyed, Gerard pulls rank and places the investigation under federal jurisdiction. The sheriff initially agrees, believing the situation is a nothing burger. However, the tone quickly changes when Marshal Robert Biggs, played by Daniel Roebuck, arrives with a set of empty leg irons. The head guard immediately recants his story, as leg irons typically have legs in them, and only he had the keys. He identifies Kimball as a prisoner who may have survived. The sheriff is exasperated about being humiliated in front of TV news crews, while Gerard, marshaling the gathered law enforcement, orders a manhunt to begin immediately for Dr. Richard Kimball, who he estimates already has a 6-mile head start. As day breaks, Kimball, still wearing his Illinois Department of Corrections jumper, observes a tow truck driver dumping a utility jumpsuit in his truck, which Kimball purloins and changes into while approaching a rural hospital. The marshals are continuing their investigation. A blood trail found 2 miles away compels Gerard to get Kimball's face faxed to every local hospital. A loud ruckus erupts near the train wreckage, as first responders have pulled the stabbed guard from the wreckage, still alive. Kimball enters Harris Community Hospital, which, in reality, is a healthcare facility in North Carolina where these sequences were shot. You will find occasionally in these sequences that the topography of the Midwest seems very hilly and mountainy compared to the relative flatness Illinois is known for. He finds an empty room and treats his wound. He also breaks into the room of a sleeping elderly patient, where he steals his clothes, eats his breakfast, quickly shaves, and disguises himself as a doctor. Kimball is convinced he's been made as he approaches a state trooper who is holding a fax with his picture on it. The trooper talks to him as Kimball tries to walk away, asking if he's seen anyone who seems to match this doctor's exact description, but he diffuses it by stating that, yeah, he'd look just like it if not for the beard. The affirmative response is enough to sway the trooper. As a note, prisoners are usually de-bearded when entering Department of Corrections custody to prevent this sort of thing from happening. As Kimball tries to leave, an ambulance carrying the injured guard arrives. The guard recognizes Kimball, but Kimball subdues him with an oxygen mask and starts talking to the EMTs before he can be outed. Kimball mentions to the EMTs that the injured guard has a stab wound, which leaves the EMTs perplexed as to how he'd be able to tell that at first glance. Kimball steals their ambulance and flees. Gerard and his squad receive background information on Kimball. Gerard demands Marshal Cosmo Renfro, played by Joe Pantoliano, yes, his first name is Cosmo, contact a judge and get an army of wiretaps, including one on Kimball's lawyer in violation of attorney-client privilege. They also get a call indicating the wounded guard saw Kimball and that an ambulance is missing. When Marshal Aaron Poole, played by L. Scott Caldwell, learns police have spotted the ambulance, the marshals take off in a helicopter. Kimball makes an honest attempt to try to evade law enforcement, but the old rural adage still applies. You can't outrun the radio, especially when a helicopter is involved. When Kimball drives through a hydroelectric dam viaduct, the marshals block the exit with their chopper. Police swarm the tunnel, and the marshals converge on Kimball's stolen ambulance, but they find it empty. The marshals are apoplectic and believe Kimball has vanished into thin air until Gerard hears a storm drain. Kimball has escaped into a tunnel in the dam. Marshals Gerard, Renfro, and Biggs follow after him. Biggs and Renfro split off from Gerard to cover more ground. Kimball tries to descend further into the sewer, but Gerard hears him banging into a wall. When Gerard attempts to descend to the same hill with his firearm drawn, he slips and falls all the way down. Gerard recovers but realizes he can't find his gun. Having clearly seen a few movies, he very slowly turns around with his hands in the air. Kimball has Gerard's pistol aimed at him. Kimball pleads that he didn't kill his wife, but Gerard is a state-sanctioned bounty hunter. "I don't care," is his response. Rather than execute the marshal, Kimball withdraws. Unfortunately for Kimball, once he's out of visual range, Gerard brandishes a backup weapon and continues the pursuit. Kimball reaches the end of the duct and discovers he's at a dead end. Gerard reaches the distracted Kimball and holds him at gunpoint. Having already been convicted and sentenced to death, Kimball, seemingly with nothing to lose, makes the only choice he can. He jumps off the dam, plunging hundreds of feet into the spillway's freezing water. Despite being in shock of Kimball's outrageous actions, Gerard doesn't switch off. He immediately orders the dam turned off, search teams, searchlights, generators, and the river dragged. Any attempt to talk him down is met with the assertion that if the fall killed him, then he should be easy to catch. Hundreds of yards downriver, Richard Kimball breaks above the water, having survived the fall. He collapses in a force and apparently does so in such a way that he evades hundreds of state police and sniffer dogs. The unconscious Richard Kimball is a nightmare that provides additional context to the viewer. He recounts attempting to resuscitate his wife and fighting with the one-armed man. He hears his attorney claim they can't find anyone matching Kimball's description of the real killer. He awakens after hearing himself scream, "You find that man," setting the stage for Kimball's next move. Gerard's Chicago-based squad has returned to home base. They've received intelligence about their target that matches Kimball's movements in previous scenes. They converge early morning on a home across the state line in rural Indiana. The squad, having donned the guise of homeless people and utility workers, breach the building. It quickly becomes evident that the marshals have not located Kimball, but rather Copeland, the other escaped prisoner from the bus crash. The film was banking on you forgetting about him. Copeland takes Marshal Noah Newman, played by Tom Wood, hostage, and tries to barter for escape, but Gerard, acting decisively, flanks Copeland and shoots him twice at close range from behind, killing him. Newman, recovering from what can only be permanent hearing damage, criticizes Gerard's cavalier performance, to which Gerard makes clear that he doesn't bargain. Later that same day, Kimball, who has darkened his hair color, arrives in Chicago. He contacts his attorney for assistance, but he refuses to aid and abet a felon. When his lawyer asks where Kimball is so he can help him arrange a surrender, Kimball claims he's in St. Louis and hangs up. The marshals are analyzing the phone call as Gerard gloats about having been correct to not call off the manhunt for Kimball. The marshals identify an elevated train in the background of the call, which is not a fixture of St. Louis. While listing off U.S. cities with elevated trains, the techs isolate a voice on a public address system indicating the next stop is Merchandise Mart, a commercial building in downtown Chicago. Gerard is left perplexed as to why Kimball would return to the city that knows he is a pariah. Kimball stops his friend, Dr. Charles Nichols, outside his tennis club. The doctor, surprised, offers to house him, but Richard, who knows that if Nichols isn't already on police radar that he soon will be, simply asks him for money, which Nichols gives him. The marshals meet with CPD detectives Kelly and Rossetti. Gerard seems unconvinced of Richard's motive for murder, as both the Chicago police and the district attorney's office seemingly decided it stood to reason that a rich doctor killed his partner over her life insurance policy and left it at that. He takes the investigation file and declares his team will re-interview all the people attached to the murder. The marshals have also refused to allow the media to be notified that Kimball is in town, deciding to not tip their hand to Kimball that they know he has returned. Chicago police notify their officers of this development, but that for the time being to conceal the manhunt from the public. Kimball rents a basement apartment in South Chicago from a Polish mother and son with the money he got from Nichols, then infiltrates Cook County Hospital in the Illinois Medical District. His objective becomes clear: the prosthetics clinic. He surveils the area, then steals a janitor's ID badge and departs. He is later shown purchasing a work uniform similar to the Cook County Hospital custodial staff, as well as altering the ID badge with his photo. He also conducts research on prosthetic arms. The Marshals are now re-interviewing staff at Chicago Memorial Hospital in Hyde Park, where Richard Kimball worked. Dr. Charles Nichols freely admits he saw Kimball that morning and that he'd given him the cash he had on him. Gerard implores Nichols to help them bring Kimball safely into custody, but Nichols refuses, insisting Richard is innocent. Various other hospital staff members, including Dr. Kathy Wayland, played by Jane Lynch, continue to insist on Richard's innocence and that they would aid him if asked. Kimball has another nightmare at his home base, in which he recounts fighting the one-armed man more vividly, including a close-up of his prosthetic arm. He is awoken from the dream by Chicago police raiding the house. Resigned to his fate, Kimball is instead shocked to hear the police are arresting the landlady's son and an associate on narcotics distribution charges. For whatever reason, the police do not further investigate the property and leave with their prey, allowing Kimball to evade capture once again. Kimball makes his run that evening at Cook County Hospital. Staff outside the hospital describe a bus crash with child victims who will be arriving later for treatment. Disguised as a janitor, he gains access to a computer terminal in the prosthetics lab and proceeds to access a database of all of their patients. Using the criteria he researched based on his recollection of the fight with the one-armed man, he initially identifies 112 patients, but when he narrows the scope for last adjustment to the time frame of Helen Kimball's murder and the type of joint, he is left with 5 records. He prints the contact information and prepares to flee the hospital. Unfortunately for Kimball, the landlady's son recognizes him on wanted posters inside his CPD precinct and proceeds to inform police of his location. CPD and the Marshal team investigate Kimball's now former base of operations. Marshal Henry, played by Johnny Lee Davenport, discovers the acronym CCH, left behind with paraphernalia Gerard identifies as being used to create fake IDs. They conclude that he is at Cook County Hospital. Kimball's exit is blocked by a crowd of people related to the bus crash. He observes doctors tending aid to a child complaining of pain, and becomes concerned that the overworked and distracted staff are not referencing or interpreting an x-ray of his injuries correctly. A doctor who goes otherwise unnamed but is played by Julianne Moore asks the janitor to bring the child's gurney to an observation room. Her curiosity is piqued when she catches the janitor looking at the x-ray. While in the elevator, Kimball examines the child, known as Joel, and asks probing questions. He proceeds to falsify documentation ordering an immediate emergency medical procedure and instead brings Joel to an operating room for surgery. As he attempts to leave the hospital, the doctor, who learned the child never made it to observation, corners Kimball. She wants to know how a janitor would know that the child actually suffered a traumatic head injury. He contends that he was just following orders from another doctor, but when he can't name anyone with that authority, she takes his ID and calls security. As Kimball flees out the back, the Marshals arrive in the front. Gerard interviews the doctor, who just wants to go home. When Gerard asks how the boy is doing, she says Kimball saved his life. Marshal Renfro asks Gerard the obvious question. Why would Kimball wander into a hospital crawling with cops just to act like Mother Teresa? As if to answer the question, a man with one arm bumps into them trying to go to the prosthetic clinic. They proceed to investigate. Surmising that Kimball may be looking for a one-armed man, they access the same database and, using less specific information than Kimball, identify 47 patients. They plan to further narrow their list by cross-checking for criminal records. Their motives will not be so noble as Kimball's. They are not looking for the real killer. They are looking for witnesses to Kimball's continuing escape. Kimball starts phoning the numbers on his list of 5 patients, posing as the prosthetic clinic or old high schools. The first 2 he calls don't interest him. However, he learns that the third, a Clive Driscoll, has been locked up for one-armed robbery at the jail in Chicago City Hall. The next morning is St. Patrick's Day. Chicago is awash in many of the trappings of that day. They've dyed the river green, and the festivities, including a parade, are shown as being underway. Across from the parade, Kimball enters City Hall. Law enforcement have more than ample opportunity to identify him, but fail. Using a phony ID, Kimball arrives at lockup and requests to meet Driscoll. The Marshals, having identified Driscoll from their search, also arrive. Not content to wait for an elevator on a busy day, Gerard opts to take the stairs. Kimball sits down to talk with Driscoll, but any hope of confronting the man who killed his wife is dashed when he discovers Clive Driscoll, played by Maurice Person, does not resemble the killer. Kimball, not opting to wait for an elevator, takes a different stairwell. The City Hall is depicted as having a stairwell on each corner of the building. Kimball and Gerard do not hard bump into each other. However, Gerard does a double take at a man he sees heading down the stairwell across from him and leans over to investigate. He shouts Richard's name. Kimball, unfortunately, falls for the ruse and looks up. The chase begins anew. Kimball reaches the lobby first and flags down police, claiming a man in a blue topcoat is waving a gun at a woman. The police then apprehend Gerard, allowing Kimball to attempt to escape in the confusion. Marshal Biggs and Henry order the CPD to stand down and release Gerard. They all take off in pursuit, ordering the building to be locked down. Kimball becomes stuck in the door, clearly not having Indiana Jones's luck. Gerard opens fire in a crowded public building at Kimball, aiming for his head, but the door glass is bulletproof, repeatedly saving Kimball's life. As a production note, Tommy Lee Jones initially objected to his character trying to murder Kimball, but the director noted that his character didn't flinch at shooting a black man earlier, and pointed out if Gerard was an equal opportunity when it came to shooting people, how it would come off. Being a rabid attack dog of the federal government is okay, being a racist is not. Kimball frees his foot from the door and takes off, while the marshals are left demanding that the building staff reopen the door. Kimball seeks refuge in the St. Patrick's Day Parade. This sequence was filmed during the actual St. Patrick's Day Parade in 1993. It was actually double-booked with the production of the 1993 film Blink. The crowd reactions to Tommy Lee Jones and Johnny Lee Davenport chasing Harrison Ford are genuine. Kimball is eventually able to slide out of the parade and escape, somehow evading Gerard's notice despite being 5 yards in front of him. The public spectacle forces law enforcement to reveal that there is an active manhunt for Richard Kimball in Chicago. The press latch on to the idea that Kimball's moves only make sense if he's trying to find the real killer. CPD insists that he was convicted in a fair trial. Kimball, from a bar in West Pullman, telephones the 4th number on his list, belonging to a Frederick Sykes. However, nobody answers. The changed atmosphere in Chicago is evident as Kimball recognizes Detective Rossetti across the street, who in turn fails to recognize Kimball. It becomes apparent that Kimball is stationed near the Sykes' residence, which, surprisingly, is actually real-world accurate. Kimball, convinced no one is home, breaks into Sykes' apartment. He doesn't have to glance around the place for long, as a picture on the wall and a merit award depict retired Chicago police officer Frederick Sykes, played by Andreas Katsoulis, on the wall. Kimball immediately recognizes him as Helen Kimball's killer. Kimball also finds the hook arm that he pulled off Helen Kimball's killer during the struggle. Expanding his search, Kimball finds more disturbing evidence. He finds pictures of Sykes standing next to Alec, who Richard had met the night of Helen's murder. This also ties together for the audience that Alec and Lentz are the same person. He also finds pay stubs for Devlin McGregor Pharmaceuticals, who were one of the sponsors of the gala that evening. Kimball also recollects the surgery he was called in to assist with. The patient involved had been referred by Dr. Alec Lentz, who had prescribed him an experimental non-invasive arterial plaque-reducing drug called RDU-90, also known as Provasic. A conspiracy is beginning to unfold. The marshals are back at home base reviewing security footage and press of the previous day's activities. They are interrupted by a call claiming to be Richard Kimball, but their collective skepticism makes it clear they've been receiving crank calls. The man on the phone, however, authenticates himself by referencing the impromptu discussion the men had during the dam escape. Gerard signals for his staff to start tracing Kimball's call. Gerard tries to string the conversation along, telling Kimball he's not trying to solve a puzzle, but Kimball insists that he is, and that he's just found a big piece. Kimball slams the phone down, but Gerard is shocked to hear the call hasn't gone dead. Kimball has left the phone off the hook, intending for Gerard to find the Sykes residence. With Kimball's location identified, the police units nearby immediately swarm the building just as Kimball escapes. The marshals arrive at the Sykes residence. A fingerprint tech has identified the stack of photos Kimball looked at, so the marshals seize them and the negatives as evidence. Sykes returns home, recognizing the heavy police presence. Gerard questions him, asking why the fugitive Richard Kimball would make a telephone call from his apartment. Sykes initially denies knowing who Kimball is, but upon being shown his mugshot, he starts to recall the trial. Sykes offers the excuse that he's being profiled by Kimball because he has a prosthetic arm. He insists he was not the killer because he wasn't in Chicago that night, and that 15 witnesses backed up his alibi. Gerard continues to annoy him with short, pointed questions, asking about his work with Devlin McGregor, and why Kimball would be so interested in a photo that contains Sykes and, unknown to Gerard, Dr. Alec Lentz. Sykes continues to deny knowing Richard Kimball or being responsible for Helen Kimball's murder. When asked how he lost his arm, Sykes answers, in the line of duty. Gerard is forced to concede that Sykes is clearly lying to him and orders that he be placed under surveillance. This does not automatically mean Kimball is cleared of suspicion in his wife's murder, rather that Sykes may be an unindicted conspirator. He also tasks Marshall Newman with finding out who the other man in the photograph is. Running an investigation parallel to Kimball's may allow the marshals to catch him. Kimball, spurred by the connection between Sykes and Lentz, telephones Nichols, who is attending a conference at the Chicago Hilton in near Northside. When Nichols asks for an update, Kimball concludes that Devlin McGregor and Lentz are responsible and that they'd actually intended to kill Richard, not Helen. Lentz was supervising the RDU-90 drug, and Kimball had discovered it was causing liver damage. A detail that goes unstated by the film is that the procedure Kimball assisted with at the start of the film, which included a patient's gallbladder being removed, can also be a sign of liver damage. Unfortunately, Nichols promptly takes the wind out of Kimball's sails by informing him that Lentz died in a car accident the previous summer while Kimball was incarcerated. Not wanting to let the Devlin McGregor angle go, Kimball requests Nichols let one of the record keepers at Chicago Memorial Hospital know that he's coming for a visit. Later that morning, Marshals Gerard and Renfro approach Nichols to ask him more questions. Renfro shows Nichols a blown-up picture of Sykes and, unbeknownst to the marshals, Dr. Alec Lentz, and asks if Nichols knows who Sykes is. Nichols denies knowing who Sykes is. He also denies having spoken to Kimball since their previous encounter. Before Nichols can depart, Gerard also asks Nichols if he knows who the man in the purple shirt is. Nichols denies knowing Lentz. As Nichols leaves, Renfro affirms for the audience the nature of the convention. Alternatives to cardio non-invasive arterial plaque-reducing therapy, with Dr. Charles Nichols as the keynote speaker. Back at home base, the marshals are still perplexed about Kimball's breaking and entering into Sykes' apartment. A larger reprint of one of the pictures of Dr. Lentz reveals a Chicago Memorial Hospital logo on his shirt, prompting several of the marshals to depart in order to investigate. Gerard also notes that Devlin McGregor did $7.5 billion in net sales the previous year. Kimball arrives at Chicago Memorial and requests RDU-90 liver tissue samples from the records keeper of the hospital, a man known as Bones Roosevelt, played by John Watson Sr. Bones is confused as to why Kimball is asking about tissue samples, while Kimball assures him it's related to his wife. Sykes is shown receiving a phone call, then later arming himself with a revolver. The police detail watching Sykes' apartment are confused when Chicago Fire arrives for a call across the street, allowing Sykes to slip his surveillance in the confusion. Marshals Newman and Biggs have arrived at Chicago Memorial. The receptionist identifies Dr. Alec Lentz as the man in the photograph, but that she only knows who he is because he died the summer previous. Sykes is shown arriving at Chicago Memorial Hospital. There are now 4 primary characters at this location. Kimball has entered the office of Dr. Kathy Wayland, who agrees to help examine the liver tissue samples. They discover that Kimball's samples have all been tampered with and replaced with healthy samples. Marshals Newman and Biggs interview Bones. They ask if Dr. Lentz had any contact with or otherwise knew Richard Kimball, and Bones replies that he hasn't seen Dr. Kimball. The marshals point out that's not what they were asking him. As the marshals begin asking more pointed questions, Sykes is seen watching them from the shadows. Kathy and Richard speculate about Lentz's possible motive for falsifying Kimball's research. As an original patent holder of the drug, he stood to gain financially if it was approved by the FDA. Kathy notes that over half of the tampered samples that Lentz approved were done the day he died. Kathy concludes that Lentz must have been conspiring with someone else. You can practically hear Kimball's heart drop. He takes his leave, telling Kathy he's going to see a friend. Marshal Newman has called home base. He relays the identity of Dr. Alec Lentz, and that Kimball was also at Chicago Memorial that day. His presence had been signed off by Dr. Charles Nichols, but Newman has discovered something more urgent. Nichols was Lentz's boss. Gerard tasks Henry with finding him. The marshals also receive information about the death of Dr. Alec Lentz. He'd been on his way to a daily tennis match when he was killed by a car pinning him into the guardrail separating Lakeshore Drive from Lake Michigan. One of the marshal staff reports that there are no records that Frederick Sykes ever telephoned Richard Kimball dating back years. However, when he cross-checked the other way, he discovered Kimball called Sykes 7:30 p.m. the night of the murder from his car phone. While the marshals try to nail down Kimball's movements at the time of the phone call, Marshal Poole relays that Chicago police have lost track of Sykes' location. Sykes is talking to an unknown conspirator on a payphone when he spots Kimball leaving Chicago Memorial. He tails him aboard one of Chicago's elevated trains. In a moment as painful as it is comedic, Kimball has the unfortunate luck of sitting across from a man reading a newspaper with Kimball's face on it. Both men slowly realize their predicament. The passenger excuses himself and moves to the next car, reporting the finding to a transit police officer. While the officer contacts dispatch, Sykes confronts Kimball. Sykes prepares to execute Kimball, but the transit officer, with his service weapon drawn, shouts Kimball's name. Sykes turns around and shoots the officer 3 times. Kimball pulls the train's emergency brake and fights with Sykes, eventually subduing him. Kimball checks the fallen police officer and concludes he's dead. He takes both Sykes and the officer's guns and handcuffs Sykes to one of the train's posts for the police to find. A bloodied and beaten Richard Kimball exits the train through a window. Between the emergency stop and the repeated firearms discharges, the Chicagoans on the platform are all startled by Kimball urgently fleeing the area. He dumps the guns in a mailbox outside of the Chicago Hilton and then enters the building, and is shown approaching the aforementioned conference. The marshals, racing to the reported Richard Kimball sighting, receive word over the radio that a transit police officer has been killed, with Richard Kimball as the prime suspect. Kimball now is a 5-star wanted level. When the police band relays that Kimball was seen entering the Hilton Tower, Gerard knows beyond a shadow of a doubt what Kimball is doing and alters course. Dr. Charles Nichols is introduced as the keynote speaker of the conference and begins speaking about Provasic, a miracle drug with no side effects. The marshals arrive at the Hilton. Chicago police are securing the perimeter, but witness reports cannot conclusively identify Kimball as the suspect in the killing of the transit officer. Detectives Kelly and Rossetti demand Gerard stay out of their affairs, but the marshals push forward, ordering CPD to either arrest them or stay out of their way. Newman is ordered to find the security office and stay in contact by radio. Kimball enters the ballroom where Charles Nichols is speaking. He notices Kimball and has an immediate Freudian slip. Kimball slowly approaches the podium as the gathered attendees begin gasping. Seemingly trying to rally the crowd, Nichols asks what Richard Kimball wants to interrupt his speech for. Kimball begins laying out the entire conspiracy behind his wife's murder. While trying to walk out of the ballroom, Kimball accuses him of falsifying the research and also of killing Lentz. Nichols flees the ballroom while Kimball, with the spotlight on him, accuses the drug of being deadly. Entering a hotel presidential suite, Kimball is attacked from behind by Nichols. The two former friends fight, and the brawl spills out onto the rooftop. The Marshall team is one step behind, with Newman relaying Kimball and Nichols' location over the radio. Unfortunately for Kimball, the Chicago Police Department helicopter locates him on the rooftop and begins threatening him over a loudspeaker, demanding his unconditional surrender. Gerard also steps onto the rooftop. Before Gerard can reach and confront the two men, the helicopter, acting on Detective Rossetti's orders, begins to open fire on Richard Kimball. All men take cover as Gerard compels Newman to order the CPD helicopter to stand down so as to not shoot a U.S. Marshal by accident. Kimball and Nichols' fight eventually ends at a skylight, with both men falling several stories down an elevator shaft and knocked unconscious. The Marshall team races to converge at the elevator's destination, a hotel laundry. Nichols is seen escaping the elevator, and not long after, Kimball. Gerard and Renfro also enter the laundromat, with the remaining 3 marshals Biggs, Henry, and Poole tasked with evacuating hotel personnel. A cat-and-mouse game with 4 players begins in the laundromat. Gerard and Renfro split up. After some searching, Gerard shouts out Dr. Richard Kimball's name and lays out the situation, urging him to surrender to him before Chicago police can kill him. Kimball is stunned when Gerard proclaims Richard to be innocent. Nichols is seen stalking Renfro as Gerard lays out the final piece of the puzzle that exonerates Kimball. That Nichols, who had borrowed Richard's car the night of Helen Kimball's murder, telephoned Sykes while the car was in Nichols' possession, and therefore had access to Richard's house keys, explaining the lack of forced entry. A critical detail that Chicago PD did not investigate and Kimball hadn't considered. Nichols subdues Renfro with the steel girder and takes the marshal's gun. Gerard urges Kimball to end his flight. From behind Gerard, Nichols jumps out from a corner, preparing to shoot him, but Kimball saves him, striking Nichols several times with a steel pipe, subduing him and saving Gerard's life. Kimball drops the pipe and surrenders. Kimball proclaims that the conspirators killed his wife, and Gerard agrees. Gerard, in a moment of levity, is thankful the pursuit is finally over, needing to rest. The Chicago Hilton is sieged by reporters. The reporters, including NBC News correspondent Lester Holt, continue poking the police with the story that Richard Kimball was right all along. Sykes is shown being taken into police custody, and Renfro, conscious, being taken out on a stretcher. The absence of any footage of Dr. Charles Nichols in this sequence suggests that Kimball may have killed him in defense of Marshal Gerard. The marshals have taken Kimball into custody and escort him out of the Chicago Hilton. Gerard removes Kimball's handcuffs and gives him an ice pack for his injuries. Kimball, unflinching, tells Gerard that he thought he didn't care. Gerard replies, sarcastically, that he doesn't, but not to tell anyone. The marshal's Chevrolet Caprice leaves the area as the credits roll. This would ordinarily be the end of the summation, Zach, but several key questions remain. How was Richard Kimball convicted of a crime he so clearly didn't commit, and what would happen to him after being taken into custody? Well, firstly, Richard Kimball is going back to jail. It is still a crime to escape and elude capture, even if you are later found innocent. He will inevitably be exonerated of the murder of Helen Kimball. Frederick Sykes, along with Dr. Charles Nichols, if he survived, would be tried in his place. Kimball committed no shortage of offenses while on the lam. However, it is incredibly unlikely that the Cook County DA or the federal government would pursue charges against him. Setting aside the obvious wrongful conviction civil suit that Kimball will doubtlessly file against the city of Chicago, the district attorney's office would have to explain how Richard Kimball was convicted of capital murder on such flimsy evidence with multiple leads not investigated by Chicago police. Furthermore, Frederick Sykes' alibi for the night of Helen Kimball's murder was clearly manufactured. As a former member of the Chicago police, there is almost zero way it can be stated with certainty that Sykes did not conspire with members of the department to clear his involvement in Helen Kimball's murder, or that the department didn't frame Kimball to cover up his involvement. Additionally, Detective Rossetti ordering the helicopter to kill Kimball before Gerard could reach him reeks of attempting to kill a witness to police corruption. There is also the matter of Detectives Kelly and Rossetti losing track of Sykes' movements the day of the film's climax. All of this and more will easily be litigated by the press and the court of public opinion, and the Chicago police, as well as the district attorney's office, would be hard-pressed to charge Dr. Richard Kimball with anything given that, while on the lam, he also saved the lives of a prison guard, the boy at the hospital, and Marshal Gerard. The Chicago Police Department has enough embarrassment and corruption in its storied history to know that in this instance, they should let a sleeping Richard Kimball lie. It is far more likely that Kimball would be given time served for any offenses he committed during his escape and left to issue his civil suit. Also, not to get victim blamey here, but Richard, if you weren't aware that Lentz died in the summer and you escaped custody in March and everyone was wearing winter gear when you were arrested, then clearly you were incarcerated for at least a year. It didn't occur to you to mention at any point in that year behind bars that Charles Nichols had your keys in your car that night? His entire plan to have you/your wife murdered falls apart if that detail gets out. The Four Seasons hotel valet could have testified that Nichols dropped off your car. Dumping your car phone's records would have revealed the call Nichols made to Sykes while he had the car. You would have recognized Sykes as the killer. Your fingerprints would be all over his prosthetic arm. This whole thing could have been avoided. Oh hey, my keyring was held by someone else the night my wife was murdered gives the kind of reasonable doubt defense lawyers would give their left testicle for. Nichols couldn't even deny the encounter happened because right behind his desk in his office at Chicago Memorial is a photo of him and Richard Kimball that was taken at the fundraiser the night of the murder. The balls on this guy. If, between you and your lawyer, neither of you could have figured that out, I don't know, maybe you deserve to be on this de facto episode of The Running Man. Whatever.